Formerly known as Witte Centre for Contemporary Art, or FKA WDW, in order to suspend our name while we went through an intensive process of public engagement, open forums, online surveys, interrogating very deeply our mandate and purpose, why on earth we would continue to do what it is that we do or change what it is that we do. So could I have the next slide? To give some background on these names, the former name Witte Centre for Contemporary Art was taken in 1990 when the institution was established, and this very simply was the name of the street upon which the building was established. The street was there from 1870, and so when the institution was created in 1990, it took the name of the street. The name of the street, in turn, was named after a 17th century admiral, Witte de Witte, who was part of the Dutch East India Company and the Dutch West India Company, and who was a protagonist of the Dutch colonial project. And so this name, as was very publicly brought to mind with an open letter, was a name that at a certain point many publics, particularly in the Netherlands and especially in the city of Rotterdam, could not comfortably come into a place of culture and participate in culture under this name. So the name that we eventually arrived at, Melly, derives from this artwork, in fact. So when the Art Centre was created in 1990, one of the first exhibitions was a survey by a Cantonese Canadian artist called Ken Lum, who was invited by the then director Chris Durkon across from Canada. And this was a moment when the Art Centre was introducing itself to Rotterdam public across from Canada. And this was a moment when the Art Centre was introducing itself to Rotterdam publics. So in addition to the exhibition of sculpture that was in the building, throughout the city, there were 14 billboards of this artwork, along with, of course, a news campaign, a media campaign introducing a particular international idea of contemporary art to Dutch and Rotterdam publics. When the exhibition closed, the sculpture came down, and also the billboards throughout the city came down. But there were so many letters and calls into the institution asking what had happened to this contemporary art, that one of these was installed on the side of the building, and it's been permanently there since 1990, and at a street level, in some ways, it's better known than we are. But this idea for a name, in fact, also came through a bigger process, which was integral to the name change. Perhaps I can have the next slide. Which was a bigger questioning of how it is that we function as institutions in a deeply methodological way. So the ground floor, let's say, or the laboratory or the playground maybe is a better metaphor for the name change, was a ground floor gallery space. The only exhibition space that we have that's sort of directly connected to the entrance, that was being used for pilot exhibitions of sort of up-and-coming artists. So this was an exhibition of Dhaka at an early moment in her career. Laura Prouveau had also had an exhibition in this space, for example. These, of course, are artists who are, really at the leading edge of feminist, queer, and decolonial questions. But what this meant for a lot of publics in Rotterdam was that they might enter the foyer, enter the bar or the front desk, purchase a ticket, walk around the corner, and then encounter something like this. For a lot of audiences in Rotterdam, this doesn't necessarily give a clear enough welcome in terms of how to enter the space, can things be touched or not touched, how does one feel in this space. So could I have the next slide? So this downstairs space was first transformed into, as I said, this playground for the name change. So it was made free to the public. There was no admission for this space. It was transformed into a bookshop. You see some of the shelves there. And it also became the site of a lot of new kinds of programming that weren't previously taking place. So spoken word is a very active cultural practice in Rotterdam, and we developed very strong relations with the spoken word community. as well, for example, as a hairdresser that is around the corner, who came in and sort of did takeovers of this space together with DJ sets, etc. So this was an area of experimentation. It was an area in which the institution learned to do things in ways that it doesn't normally do them. If there's an event, we don't necessarily have to have a podium and a lot of chairs in a certain order. And this was really led by my colleague Jessie Koyman, who joined the institution as curator of collective learning. So perhaps I can have the next slide. This went together with sort of deeper processes of, listening to the publics and also understanding what the unnaming really signified in terms of the specific histories of Rotterdam and the Netherlands. So this is an early picture of the building in which we inhabit. It was built in 1870, in fact, as a school for girls. So our director, Sophia Hernandez-Chonqui, who really envisioned, designed, and led this process, came to really talk about the exhibition halls as classrooms, and to really conceive through the collective learning concept of a deeply pedagogic process that the transformation was, but also for what the institution does. And something that was quite important about this was also to understand that in unnaming, we were unnaming from a figure who was attached to the early modernity, so to the 1630s. But that the name had been taken in the 1870s. And so we needed to understand that we were unnaming not only from an early moment of modernity, but also from a late moment of modernity, where colonial figures had been recuperated and established as colonial patriarchs at a time of the forging of national institutions. So there was a deeply scholarly element to the name change as well, and we've worked very closely with a lot of PhD students who are very focused on this topic in the Netherlands and Europe at the moment. Can I have the final slide? So indeed, the name came into effect in January of 2021. The name Kunstinstitut Melly had in fact been proposed by a group of young people from Rotterdam who were aged 17 to 24, who first of all renamed this downstairs space. And the name of that downstairs space then also became, 1 or 2 years later through a public process, scaled up to being the name of the entire institution. As a final comment, it's been so exciting to be here, especially with this bigger framework of pedagogy, and to dive into the subcontinent tradition of pedagogic art with a figure such as Lila Mukherjee and the beautiful historical selection here. So I'll be sending a lot of photos back to the team in our WhatsApp, and we're certainly excited to see what's here at the summit. Thank you.
So can we have the point? So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Binna. I'm Director of CASCO Art Institute, working for the Commons in Utrecht, Netherlands. But here I am talking about Singapore Biennale 2022, named Natasha, which I co-curated with 3 other colleagues, Junya, Ala Yunis, and Nida Gauch. This is not the first image. So, can we go back to the first image? One further? Yes. So I'd like to begin here, meaning that I'd like to address the kind of context and condition for Singapore Biennale. It's almost opposite to Dhaka. So one of the very strong parameters for Singapore Biennale is like working with the government and within the culture where infrastructure and management and logistics are really key for keeping the country running. So especially for this edition, it took place at the former warehouse, actually still warehouse, where Singapore Art Museum, which is the host of the biennial, is temporarily residing. So in front of this warehouse, you see these thousands of containers in front of you, and there's a container called commune. Next image, please. Next. So this is the one of the many big elevators moving to stop, and you see our promotion image, and one of them is made by Singaporean artist Biennial. And next image, you see actually it is very tiny. How do you call it? This weaving, embroidery. Stuff she made as a part of work, thought lines. And so in contrast to this like very giant nation scale infrastructure, this tells one of our approach, like very small things, very small feeling. So next one. And this is just additional image. You see the Minister of Culture looking at one of the first artworks which happened at the opening. Next one. And second condition is of course pandemic, so we have about 1 year process, 1 year long preparation process, and it all came, invitation to curate came in the middle of pandemic, so we had like 8 to 10 months without meeting, without visiting, just through online meeting. And this is imaged by artist Na Jong-suk, who's neurodivergent, and this is the drawing. You see the mask on the hand, so which she wanted to use as a campaign image for distribution of mask. Next image. And the third condition is collaboration. So Singapore Art Museum is moving in the direction to be more embedded in everyday life and socially orientated. Out of this desire, they invited 4 women to curate together without experience of working together before. So that resulted in, for example, these 4 different identities or key visual for the Biennale. And so name, how we got to the name. Sometimes it can be very simple as that we have one of our common ground is working with artists whose name is Natasha. Natasha Vivian, but her, if you know her practice, you may know that she's actually touching upon the issue of authorship, identity, how to navigate in heavily politically imposed reality. And of course, Natasha Kinwala, Natasha Patrickson, we have many colleagues whose name Natasha. But more deeper meaning is in that we wanted to touch upon life in the way that rethinking of institution like a Biennale, as well as reflecting on what happened to our life through pandemic. Next image, please. So life is a very big subject. So where to touch upon has another question to be invited, and one of our focus was longing or missing, absence, and which lead you to question about where we as a human being come from. So there's many questions about relationship between human and inhuman, but we wanted to focus on actually who we are, why do we exist, why this life matters, and then how we actually navigate the loss, death. So we're moving to next image. So this is the contribution by Drew Broderick and Miley Meyer from Hawaii, and it's installed in this Sentosa Cove, one of the very famous popular leisure island. You see this 10 or 12 years boy and girl sitting on the roof of the container looking over somewhere, and costume, their look is changing over duration of Biennale. Next one, please. I just wanted to share this one because this is the profile image of Telegram. It's one of the producer of the Biennale. So before installing the mannequin, she took this photograph. And this kind of relationship matters, and that definitely fit into how all look. Next one. So life and death. I didn't have a chance to see your exhibition yet, then, but based on what I read and then glimpse of it through representation, I was really amazed by certain parallel between Bonna and Natasha. And of course, Natasha is Slavic name. But this is a work by Cambodian artist Kanitatis. So she represents once her home as reconstructed, and then she brought her newborn baby. So in naming, of course, when a baby is born, we don't give name out of whim. It indicates how naming matters and it accompanies your life. But this is another work by her, and in fact, in this home reconstruction, you can see her whole life, about like 30-something years life, through which you can also trace back how these kinds of weaving practice came about. Next one, please. And work by Brazilian Indonesian artist Danieli. This work, we don't have many installation. It's something to think about, so or something to address and processing. Like there is such an abstinence or refusal to present large work. So many works that are on the verge of disappearing, or it's not the works that are recognized as an artwork. And this work, it looks like artwork. Great art installation, but the works doesn't stay in, it will disappear, or made of the soil and plants and other organic material, and process which takes about 3 months produce fungus. So when you enter the space, you smell like very intense like smell from the rotten stuff. So Daniel brings where this is close-up image, you see like many flies. So in this ritualistic space, you see what is dying and then what is being reborn. Next, please. Yeah, so you cannot read it here. This is the film from like about 5 years ago by Cambodian filmmaker. I can't remember his name. Carving and then longer name, excuse me. And title of the work is Last Night I Saw You Smile, and it's a very personally involved documentary of the demolition process of white building from the 60s in Phnom Penh. And what you read here is that you probably will never see the shape of it, meaning the building now demolished and being the casino place. And she say, so one of the residents, when we hear its name, all we can do is miss it. Next image, please. So we can here move fast, or in terms of image, this is my conclusion part. So with naming, giving a name to an institution, art institution like Biennale, there are many different subjects that we were focusing on, including how colonial power often come with renaming things, and decolonial, of course, reversing it. But one of the core is this how to engage with love and death and question of life, and that with that question or with that sentiment, we want to bring question to thinking of new kind of institution, new system that goes beyond place and locality while embracing it. I will end here. It's very, very good.
Next, I'm going to pass this to Sebastian, but I give a little bit of background. So Sebastian and I have worked on many projects together, but one was here in Bangladesh with a bunch of Polish brothers led by Pavel Althamar. And when we were doing this, like we were all calling each other brother and sister, Sebastian was like, this is ridiculous, like why are you the only sister here? And so it's interesting to come back to this discussion at this interesting time we're about to open the building where this will all be, the things that you see in the summit will become permanent in another form. So Seth, you.
Yeah, we have even like this WhatsApp group, like Polish brothers, yeah? It's really funny. Okay, it's, I would start with this feeling, because all of us are probably a little bit like tripping, hallucinating, jet-lagged and freezing now, you know, so it's a very strange kind of feeling, but it's a good feeling. It's like, it's a coming back home feeling at the same time. I would start, before we move to this Irish story, I would like to express like this my happiness, you know, like it's and stress it up, you know, and say it loud. There is something which is good about like figures, characters, and I would say that Dhaka Summit, Bonna, is a character. It's like a very mischievous, like kind of wayward, you know, prankish kind of figure, which I really admire. It's because it's a continuation. You know, it's a very rare species, like this exhibition. You know, like I keep coming back here and I see the same show, which is aging with grace, which is like getting wiser, which is getting like mature, and which is being more and more generous. And this is because like Diana is there. You know, like kind of. You know, you have like this constellation of people. It's a very rare thing. I didn't think about it before, you know, like to have the same person, like kind of pulling the strings and kind of calibrating it. Like, you know, it's also like I can see so many like familiar faces. You know, it's really like a special moment. So I would like to kind of inhale it. You know, like it's also jet lagging, you know, like so I'm getting kind of emotional. But yeah, so Limerick. So a few months ago I was appointed curator, like a guest curator of a very old kind of operation, like a kind of exhibition thing, which was initiated in the 70s, in 1977, in the city of Limerick, in Ireland, which is one of the oldest biennials which I know, and it was established, was set up as a kind of like an artist-run thing, totally based on open calls. You can imagine like the results, you know, like a lot of Irish artists sending stuff, and then you have like this very interesting figure of, not a curator, they call it an adjudicator. I don't know what it means exactly, but there was like this way of like filtering out like good stuff, you know, and then piling up it somewhere in some places. But can we have like the next slide? So can we have the next image, please? So the exhibition kept changing and evolving, and my kind of, you know, approach to EVA, which sounds like the Polish name Eva, which is just like this very generic acronym for Exhibition of Visual Arts, so disappointing. So EVA was having those really interesting moments, like, you know, changing into, morphing into somebody else, you know. So, you know, when it was a very late appointment, so I decided to think about this exhibition, as a person, which is like kind of aging, which is, you know, like having those different moments in her life. And so actually, like, coming back to those previous editions, like browsing, you know, digging out those old catalogs, was like, you know, exploring somebody's attic, you know, like bringing out things from the drawers and looking at those family photos, you know, like so. And then I found some very interesting images. I was trying to imagine Eva as a young, rebellious person, you know, like I was very like inquisitive, like very, you know, like curious to find out, you know, what Eva did as a little girl, you know, what was, actually she had like a very boring childhood. She has a very interesting teenage moment. And then I found like this image which was really inspiring to me. It's just like a straight numeric, it's Felix González Torres piece, classic, 1995. Bulbs, you know, like some electricity and cables. This is the work. I guess nobody noticed it. You know, like this is like the piece which is so like kind of embedded in the urban tissue that you don't see it. And I dreamed about such a show. You know, like I dreamed about a show which is kind of camouflaged, which is kind of almost we had this discussion about Eva with my colleagues from the numeric office, that, you know, this is like a piece of public property, you know, Eva. It's been there so long that people cannot imagine it, like imagine living without it, but they also still hate it, because it's still like an alien thing, even though it's there for like half a century. So they still hate it, but they have their opinions about it because it's a piece of public property. So even a taxi driver told me it should be about the methane release and cows, you know, like, because this is a very important thing in Ireland, you know, you should dedicate your show to cows, you know, like, yeah, maybe. So can we have like next show? So as you can see, there are like moments in this development of the exhibition when artists started to explore such places as pubs, you know, like schools and so on. Next slide. And sometimes doing like those really beautiful, subtle gestures, like, you know, just showing this, just like having those seeds. I don't know if you can see it, but it's like just a lovely day. It's just flowers, you know, like a piece which costs like €5, you know, like, you know, nobody. It's a beautiful work. Next one. So I found it myself in the city of Limerick, like looking at this legacy, at the biography of Eva, and I was thinking about this, you know, farming aspect, you know, like the cultivation aspect of exhibition making, having a show as a garden, like, you know, watering it, you know, like looking at it, at the growth of the place, and it's all like farming agricultural terminology. Next slide. Yeah, it's okay. We can. This probably you cannot see anything, but I picked like a few words like verbs and nouns, you know, like from this farming, you know, vocabulary. Starting with gleaning, and gleaning is a very interesting, you know, thing, which was explored, you know, many times. You know, like gleaning is like picking the leftovers on the field. It's something from the Bible, you know, like there's like this, you know, fragment in the Bible which expresses the importance of leaving the apples on the ground. You know, like if they fell from the tree, the poor, the orphans, the widows might pick them. You know, or like not really over like harvesting the land. This is a very interesting way of thinking about like sharing. Yeah, it's like it's a very lumbung thing. Yeah, at the same time, you know, it's like it's gleaning. Of course, in Ireland, gleaning is important. It's like enshrined. It's like entrenched because of the famine history. So there are like books which I found from the 19th century, even, you know, like about the gleaning of seaweed, you know, gleaning of fishes, like gleaning of you know, like the crops and so on. Next slide. And so this is like something which like it's being like depicted in the, you know, like in paintings, and it's there. But think about like gleaning as a exhibition making methodology. You know, not only as a theme, not only as a subject, but also about like gleaning from the past. gleaning from somebody's biography, gleaning from the previous editions. Next slide. So I had like only a few months to do the show. I started to glean from the past, from the previous editions of the exhibition. I set up like this kind of intense dialogue with the previous curators of the Biennial, and I was thinking about, maybe there are like leftovers, or like, you know, or like the surplus which was produced in the history of this exhibition, which I can bring back, including you know, such beautiful works like Janet Mullen or me. She was probably overlooked, you know, when she exhibited her works, because she was a female sculptor, like figurative and so on. So why not to bring back those works which I produced for the Biennial, and so on and so on. So next slide. So I was thinking about, first of all, works which might be restaged and brought back. The second thing is things which are ongoing, which I might be gleaning from, you know, like ongoing processes, ongoing programs, ongoing projects, and also about like inviting artists who were part of the previous editions and who have like those kind of unfinished businesses with the city, you know, so we can like kind of also piggyback, using the other term, on the you know, of something which is already there, instead of like overproducing the Biennial. So La Mary di Pula is also like an interesting aspect. I haven't like reviewed any of the names yet, so this is like the moment, you know, like La Mary di Pula, for example. She's a part of the Biennial, and she's been photographing haystacks for like 3-4 decades, you know, already. Next slide. Or you have artists such as Slavs and Tatars Collective. They've been working on those ABC books for children, you know, and then we are thinking about the kind of like a spatial iteration of their like children book for schools. So the other aspect of gleaning is gleaning from the city, which I'll, next slide, which we can also like use and activate. Other names, Olga Michinska, she's more like a carpenter than a visual artist. She's like she's a visual artist, but doing like furniture and creating, establishing like this collective called the Building Institute, which is like a queer collective of plumbers and bricklayers and carpenters and so on. Next slide. Jamin Chan, it's like for you, Binna. You know, this is the link between Natasha and Eva. So with Jamin, we were like discussing, you know, how we can, you know, use the city, use the infrastructure of the city, and not kind of overuse it, not like abuse it. And we're thinking about the places where people waste their time. So with Jamin, we're thinking about a waiting room in a hospital, which is a place for her video works. You know, like you wait, and you can be really like, I think it's also like a very soothing kind of healing also experience of looking at her works. Next slide. And okay, to kind of conclude with the second term, there are like a few terms stolen or like hijacked from this farming kind of vocabulary. But the second term, which is also very, very important and very useful, is fallow. To lay something fallow is to leave the field like uncultivated. You know, you have to do it from time to time. You cannot like over harvest the field. Next slide. So my colleagues from the office, they've been working for like 2 years on this beautiful project called Never Look Back, enlisting, cataloging, mapping all the previous venues for the Biennial. It's like 163 venues, as far as I remember, like crazy places, like flower shops and you know, fire station, you know, like kindergartens and so on. So they will be a part of the show, but we keep them followed, you know, like we keep them and we don't do anything with them. So it's like just about like kind of exhibiting them, naming them, labeling them, to stressing up their presence and the history of this person, which is called Eva. Thank you.
Cool, so we'll close and let you guys go back out into the exhibition, and I'll give a little bit of an introduction to Bonna. But I was also thinking, you know, before Bonna, I inherited the word summit. The summit wasn't a term I made up, and maybe a lot of people don't know this, but the name summit comes from the Samnanis who were young, I guess we were all young at one point, young collectors, went to the India Art Summit. So the India Art Fair used to be called the India Art Summit, and they were kind of mind blown that like this kind of event could happen in India, and why couldn't something like this happen here? So the India Art Summit became the India Art Fair, and it took me nearly a decade to change the perception that the Dhaka Art Summit was not an art fair. But the summit, summit is a weird word. Like, it's usually used in political contexts. But what I like about it is I could actually have a summit with no exhibition. It's something that could kind of be anything it needs to be. And I was trying to think about that. Could I have my PDF, please, my presentation? So I was thinking about it, and in the last summit, which was called Seismic Movements, it was the first summit that kind of had a subtitle, that came from looking at the summit as a mountain, because that is one reading of it. But now I'm actually looking at that meeting point of the summit, so I guess this will kind of come out as I talk through this. So this is an image from Seismic Movements Dhaka Art Summit 2020, which closed on February 15th. We had 500,000 visitors here in 9 days, and this is right before COVID. We are so lucky and so grateful that this happened. And what you're looking at here is an installation and performance by the Antwerp-based artist of Nigerian origin, Otobong Ikanga, and the piece is called Landversation. So Otto was here for 6 weeks, and she was meeting different people who are working with land and healing, really listening to people from Bangladesh, learning about how they're dealing with their own environment, how, there's one guy who is, recycling plastic and making new forms of containers. What are these ways of inventing for living where you are, where you don't have the privilege to leave? And one day during Incel, she came with me with glowing eyes about floods, because obviously I mentioned Bangladesh, the first thing someone's going to say to me is probably something about floods. And she was saying how this researcher was telling her that floods were not this disastrous thing at one point in Bangladesh because people were building for the rainy season. They knew it was going to be wet, and architecture was planned this way. It was only kind of during colonization when people wanted to extract things out with the railroads at all times of the year, or live in AC pumped boxes like this one, that keep the temperature the same the whole year, that this became a problem. Of course, anything in excess is a problem. This is not saying that floods are not a problem. They definitely are, and we actually we delayed the release of the summit so many times because of floods that had happened at the moment we were planning to release. But it is a part of life. And I guess, talking with artists is a big part of my curatorial practice, and Josh Klein and I were chatting about how every culture has a flood myth, yet we're still here. And then I was reading, we were all reading too many random things on the internet, but something came up about how Bangladesh was a place where people were named Flood, and I thought that was a really interesting kind of way to bring these kind of three conversations together. But what you're seeing here with Otobong's piece is, I think, where I saw that actually, while I was playing with the idea of mountain as a summit, it's the meeting point that's what's most important here. And the exhibitions develop out of these meetings, and they happen over time. So like Sebastian said, a lot of people in here have been part of the summit, and actually their work comes into what we're building here. We try to work very collaboratively. And I guess I'll speak to that in the next slide, if we can move. So these are images of our art mediators. And actually the one on the right is actually named Bonna, that's her name. There's also some drawings downstairs of the Jago kids. There's a few Bonnas in there too. But here, this is just a fraction of them. We have a huge group of art mediators. So my phone keeps going off because we have a WhatsApp group looking, keeping track of all the artworks. But they actually, in this edition, became part of the curatorial process. So we were having some of these Zoom calls, and one of the volunteers was like, well, why are we the last people that you talk to that are just there to execute your thinking when we're actually the people here pumping this whole thing? We could not do this without these art mediators. They're taking artists around, they're engaging with the public, they're making sure the artworks are safe. This is really their thing. So before Bonna got released to anybody outside of this circle, it was something for them to think about. It was something for them to ponder. It was something for them to contribute to. So there are actually artworks in here as well that the artists were having calls with the mediators to develop the artworks. They really became an internal part of the thinking, which I think, is something, when we think about what the world looks like after this seismic stop post-COVID, I think this this thing of this top-down speaking to people is probably not the best way to go. And that's something I love about the summit, is that everyone is free to have their own conversations on whatever level. And we tried to think of this, you know, Bonna, almost like, you know, not to be silly, but almost like Sesame Street, where the same material can speak to adults and children at the same time. Next slide, please. So here, you're looking, so I guess Anli is something that connects a lot of people in this audience, but also Natasha and Bonna. So Anli is not in Bonna, but Anli was in Dhaka Art Summit 2016. The Tino Segal, I don't have an image of that because it was Tino Segal's piece, which we could not show, but when, so we can't show images of, but when Sebastian mentions an aging person, Anli, who was then, you know, embodied by 12-year-old Bangladeshi girls, is an adult now. And it's interesting to see how, you know, a lot of these audiences have grown up with the summit and what this means. And when you see the difference between the Bangladesh exhibition on the 3rd floor and the Sundani Art Award, you can see this massive leap in how generations are changing. What you're seeing on the left, so this is Dhaka Art Summit 2014, which was the first summit to have international artists. This is an image of Rashid Rana, who was a very well-known, market-loved Pakistani artist. And he created a project, you're seeing it here, and this is the space where Afra Shafiq's Minecraft Anthill video game is. And it was called A Room for Tate Modern. And he basically like recreated a white cube room at Tate to scale with wallpaper. We had built we transformed this whole building into a white cube. And what you're seeing now in the plaza, which is where that was, it's open air. Air is breathing in and out. Like we don't want to be a room for Tate Modern. I think it's interesting that this was here, but like we've really grown up to kind of move past that. And I think it is interesting when I think of the word summit, I'm really, a lot of people might not know this, but Bangladesh has the oldest continually existing biennial in Asia. It's called the Asian Art Biennale, and it started in 1981. It still exists, and we lost 10 days of our install time because they decided to extend their show. So, you know, while we happen every 2 years, we're not a Biennale, but I also like that we're not a Biennale because that word connotes a certain, people of course envision Biennales in many different ways. They're different, but it connotes a certain type of event. Where in Bangladesh, there's, and in many parts of the world, there are many ways of engaging with culture, be it like jatra, or, you know, different types of theater, or different types of fairs or festivals, or ways that culture and publics meet. So I like that the summit this time is trying to kind of collect all these different forms of sharing cultures with publics and bring it under one roof. Next slide, please. So the first people to release the curatorial statement were these children on the left. So these are children that live in Takurgaon. It's the northwest of Bangladesh, and most of their parents are climate migrants. So it floods too much in the south, they have to move, and so these children's being is tied with climate change. So they read or someone translated the note to them, and then they created a play that you can see in the Very Small Feelings show and also on the internet about who this character Bonna is. Interestingly, the child of someone in this audience who is 7 was asking, why does Bonna have to be a girl? Which I thought was also a very interesting question and fuels into other parts of the show. On the right, you have images. This work is also in Very Small Feelings. It's Satyajit Ray's silent film 2, which is also, so while it seems like a silent film for children with like a privileged child and a street child battling it out with their toys, it's a commentary on the Vietnam War. Next slide, please. Here you have, this is not from Dhaka. I'm so excited to see how this looks with all of our visitors here, but this is Roman Ondak's Measuring the Universe, and it took me 6 years to get him to say okay to show this here. But what I think is interesting here in this piece is that you're not allowed to have a last name, right? It's really trying to shed that reading and really this collective portrait of people being together. Next slide, please. Also, names are important. So the name Bangladesh means the land of people who speak Bangla, but there's at least 40 other indigenous languages here. So this kind of strand of indigenous art and indigenous thinking that you see here in the summit is actually challenging that name of Bangladesh, and that's been something that's a little bit subtle, but not so much right now with Choi piece downstairs, which flooding is a form of violence that's used against indigenous people all over the world, including in Bangladesh. It came from the Pakistan era, but there was a hydroelectric dam that was built that flooded the area where the Chakma King's palace is. So today people take boats over it. It's absolutely beautiful, but the palace is under the water. And so downstairs you're seeing Joydev kind of Joydev envisioning his people lifting that palace out and finding another way of being. I believe this is my last slide. Yeah, so I think we'll open this up to the audience for questions, but I think something that's come across all of our presentations is this need to collaborate, the need to not always do things that are new, because sometimes there are things that already exist, or when you talked about gleaning, Binna and I were part of a really interesting convening by a field in Documenta, and someone came up with a proposal like, what happens to all these dead open call proposals, right? Like artists put so much time into these proposals that never get realized. Might it be time to look at those or find another way to activate those? So, and listening, right? That it's maybe, we're not here to give people culture. They have their own culture and their own things that they want to share with us. And how do we take that into our formats? Maybe we can just all say one closing sentence, and then we can open to questions. And then also I should share that the children in this video will be performing at 3:30. They were supposed to be performing with another group from the south, but I guess in a very Bonna little girl way, the kids have chickenpox and can't travel. So you're only gonna see half of the kids here, but it's still gonna be great. So Binna, any thoughts?
Well, I think we have to address why all these names are girls' names. Because we had other candidate, which was Brian, but we said no. But it was also important that it's a common name. So in fact, it could be Diana, Binna, any name ends with A. But with this naming like Bonna, Eva, Melly, and Natasha, I think what we are heading for is what the summit talking about, the importance of relationship and dialogue. How much per se it may sound within the art context, maybe we were so occupied with a production and object and display, and then if exhibition can serve as a point and space for gathering and forging the relationship, not among only special people, but anyone with any name. I think that's what we can strive for from where we are.
Thank you. Amazing to hear about my sisters' biographies and life stories. I'd say in our life story we had something of a midlife crisis, and we've come out of it. And also the name change was indeed a gender transition as well. We went from being named after the colonial patriarch to being named after an immigrant woman. But I would say that the name also signified a process and a kind of a promise as well. So as Bonna names a girl's name, but also flood as a climactic presence. One of the decisions that sort of really swung in favor of the name Melly, because there was 3 or 4 names on a short list at that point, that went to an external advisory committee. And this was through a very rigorous process of public forums, online survey, the advisory committee. The findings of the advisory committee were read to something like a town hall meeting, which was also in physical space and online. A final moment for sort of all voices and responses to be voiced. And within that meeting there was a young photographer, young Curaçao Dutch photographer in Rotterdam, who'd really been part of some of the public processes that you saw on the screen with spoken word and other participants coming into our institution for the first time. And he put his hand up and he said, the name Melly is a promise to me that when this institution changes its name, these processes will continue. So at that point, the name Melly had come to signify a new kind of openness and way of being for the institution. So I would say that there's the gender question, but there's sort of the broader what names signify. Something that was very important to us in the name change process was a citation from Paul Preciado, which is that a name is a debt. To whom and to what are you dedicated as a cultural space?
Yeah, the question of continuation is like very important when we talk about like exhibition characters, you know, like those like figures. This format of a biennial, I'm not talking about institutions because it's like a different story, but it's a very like unhealthy environment, you know, like I mean like it's a very disruptive mode of operating. Imagine being like restarted as a person every second year. You know, like your memories are being erased. You're like, you know, I don't know, what you like, what you hate is kind of like forgotten, and then you have to like reinvent yourself. It's not a good habitat for raising up a child, yeah? Like, I mean, like making a show. And so, you know, so the collaboration is one thing, the other thing is also like this kind of protecting yourself from amnesia, you know, like learning from the past, not being afraid of like repeating yourself, getting stuck, and listening to each other. You know, like you know, what the most precious thing for me is like to be in a dialogue with previous curators. You know, like so. I guess they have nominated me because they didn't tell me, but this is like this process probably with the previous curators, which I think it's a way of kind of, you know, passing it further, you know, like you have like, okay, you look like a nice guy, you might be like, you know, do something which I've started, you know, like, no, but, you know, it's really something about, you know, like fighting with this, like, yeah, disruptive mode. And also like there is a question of getting focused, you know, like really it's a kind of attention exercise. It's post-growth kind of operation also, like getting smaller, like descaling, controlling kind of things, you know, like being responsible. So yeah, this is what I kind of expect nowadays from, there's also something about monogamy. Yeah, it's like, yeah, okay, I will explain. It's like, you know, monogamy, I had this conversation about like long-time relationships with, you know, certain like collaborators. Yeah, it's like, okay, so it's like monogamies. So it's not a monogamy any longer. But having like this very kind of, it's a long process, you know, you don't have to do a show all the time, you know, you have your collaboration. It's like, you know, like with them, we did done many things, and I think they ended up as an exhibition with this collaboration with Cosmin once, but yeah, there are like many kind of possible formats which you can explore also, like it doesn't have to lead to something tangible, material, like a spatial arrangement of objects, it might be also like a walk. You know, which also might be really precious.
Well, we're going to have to leave in about 5-10 minutes so the children can prepare the stage, but I would love to open the floor. Does anyone have any questions? Well, you can feel free to ask us outside. We try to also make the summit a place where people, informal dialogues are also very welcome, and I hope that everyone feels comfortable to make new friends and to join in on the collaboration. Usually, you know, the summit will happen again in another 2 years. I should clarify that the summit will not happen in our new space. They're two separate projects, and a lot of the things, like just as I showed Otto in the 2020 summit or Tino Segal in the 2016 summit, it's an iterative process and it's a chapter, or each, you know, the summit has many chapters that keep writing themselves with all of your collaboration. So thank you.